Now, sometimes you have organisms that live in extreme areas. For example, I talked about in class how some organisms will live in areas where there's a lot of active volcanoes, where oxygen is not very present in levels of high altitude. We talked about on the top of Mount Everest. We talked about birds flying high up in the air. We talked about organisms that live deep under the ocean where there is no oxygen, no light. Um, so they need a way to produce energy because they're animals. Okay, they're not a plant where they produce their own energy. They're animals. So they need a way to produce energy with little or no oxygen. And the process that they use is called fermentation. And fermentation is when your animal cells are still able to produce energy, but it's without any oxygen, or it's with little oxygen. Okay, so the definition is right there, the process in which cells break down molecules, glucose, without any oxygen. Now, because oxygen is not being used, okay, fermentation, you do not get as much energy. So I have down here, fermentation equals little energy. You are not going to get a lot of energy out of this. Unlike cellular respiration that produces a lot of energy, fermentation does not produce that much energy. Now there's two types of fermentation. Let me talk about this one first. The lactic acid in humans. Okay. Now this is very interesting because we talked about in class how if you're an athlete and you're going for a long time, you're running, let's say soccer players, or you're running a race. You know that fatigue that you feel in your muscles, the tiredness that you feel in your muscles? Well, what's happening is your body is using up a lot of energy. And because you are increasing your breathing and you're working really hard, okay, you're running on little oxygen. So your cells, in order to conserve energy, have switched over to this fermentation process. Okay, they're using the fermentation process now. And what happens is the byproduct, or what's released out of the fermentation process, in addition to carbon dioxide, is what's called lactic acid. Okay, this term right down here, lactic acid, is released. And that's actually what causes a lot of your soreness in your muscles the next day. You know, if you don't cool down properly or you don't stretch out properly, you will get this lactic acid buildup because your body has went through the fermentation process. So if you hear that term, you know where it comes from now. It's because our bodies are using very little oxygen in order to get energy. Now the other type of fermentation is called alcohol fermentation. And this isn't just related to, your wines or your beer, what you might think alcohol to be. It also occurs in a lot of yeast and other types of bacteria. They will use this fermentation process to produce their energy because there is little or no oxygen available. I think of a lot of times deep sea organisms will go through the alcohol fermentation process in order to obtain their energy. Now, couple questions. What do glucose, photosynthesis, and cellular respiration all have in common? Well, glucose is produced during photosynthesis and is used in cellular respiration to produce energy. I think that's just so fascinating that glucose is what is produced in plants themselves, and we need it in order to go through our cellular respiration. So that, again, is just amazing to me. And again, when would cells use the fermentation process instead of cellular respiration? Well, it's when there is not enough oxygen available. Either there is no oxygen or there is very little oxygen.